Good morning. I see folks milling about here. We are going to transition right into Climate Day. So welcome to Climate Day 2025. Today feels really special to me. What a great way to start the day. Thank you for joining us with Rob Craven. You know, we have this opportunity right now to be gleaning insights together, understanding opportunities, developing new collaborations, because we need those more than ever. So we're deeply thankful to New Hope, who has enabled us to have this platform, to Trodden, New Hope's sponsor of Climate Day, and to the ongoing sponsors of the Climate Collaborative. So what I'd like to do really quickly is at least give you a sense of the flow of the day so you know what sessions. There's going to be sessions actually starting over in Grand Ballroom E as well. So here's your roadmap. At 9 o'clock, there will be 2 concurrent sessions. In this room, we'll have Disrupting Carbon-Intensive Commodity Models. In Grand Ballroom E, we'll have Emerging Policy Opportunities in 2025 and beyond. Then from 10 o'clock to 10:15, we'll have a short break. At 10:15, in this ballroom, we'll have Leveraging and Building Scope 3 Value Chain Partnerships for Collective Impact. And in Grand Ballroom E, we'll have Emerging Opportunities in Food Waste. Then from 11:15 to 11:45, we'll have a break for lunch. There'll be a resource fair. The resource fair has over 20 companies, has an amazing art exhibit that was curated by Mad Agriculture. And then all afternoon sessions will be taking place in this ballroom, so you want to be back by 11:45 sharp, because that's when we'll start moving into our keynote speakers for the day. At 11:55, we'll have From Chaos to Coherence, the Aligned Reporting Initiative's work to streamline and standardize sustainability disclosure. And then at 12:40, we'll have a panel conversation strengthening the case for regenerative agriculture, emerging opportunities in nutrient density, consumer engagement, and biodiversity. This session will dive into making the case for investment at scale in regen. There'll be a lot of really interesting emerging information, so if this is an area that you're interested in, definitely don't want to miss that session. At 1:40, we are beyond thrilled to have Otto Scharmer provide a keynote called Presencing 7 Practices for Transforming Self, Society, and Business. You don't want to miss this session. He's incredible. At 2:20, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Danny Nierenberg and Jerome Foster II in a fireside chat. Jerome was recently honored as Time Magazine's Next Generation Leader. He is also extraordinary. And then for our last keynote of the, at 2:45, we'll have a lightning round. So we'll have multiple speakers, and each will be speaking to kind of emerging opportunities in the climate space, some really interesting information there. And then for our last keynote of the day, we'll have a CEO panel, Tariffs, Trade Wars, and Funding Freezes, Navigating Climate Action in this New Era. And we'll have four amazing CEOs kind of really speaking to the moment we're in. At the close of the day at 4 o'clock, we'll have a cocktail reception, which will be over in the resource fair. So join us for another opportunity to network and eat some food and get to experience all of our service providers. So with that, welcome to Climate Day. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And as I said, there will be a session here, and there will also be a session now over in Grand Ballroom E. Take care.
So far away.
Good morning. It's so exciting to see so many new and familiar faces at what is probably not a surprise, but my favorite day of the year, which is Climate Day at Expo West. I'm Caitlin Olson, the Associate Director at the Climate Collaborative. And before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping notes. So we are live streaming all of the sessions in here today, and we'll also be recording them. So in case you need to jump out or want to share this conversation with a colleague, you'll be able to do so. I'm really excited to be moderating today's session on exploring alternative sourcing models that help move us away from the carbon-intensive commodity model that harms our farmers, communities, and the climate. As probably many of you in this room know, our current food system is failing in many ways. Food is increasingly unaffordable, farming communities face economic and climate instability, and our farm workers endure unsafe working conditions. To build a food system that supports our climate, we really must think about the dominant sourcing model and shift toward approaches that are climate smart, equitable, and resilient. This transformation requires moving beyond transactional commodity sourcing to systems that foster deep, mutually beneficial partnerships across the supply chain. Our panelists today represent just a fraction of those that are most impacted by the current system, and our hope with this discussion is that it really kind of helps to spark ideas and action to help brands rethink sourcing models and drive meaningful change. With that, I'm so thrilled to introduce today's speakers. As the head of sustainability and mission at Simple Mills, Christina Schoenberg leads the company's initiatives to advance human and planetary health. Christina oversees a series of global regenerative agriculture programs and an innovation framework that embeds ecosystem and dietary health metrics of success into the company's product design process. Prior to Simple Mills, Christina had held multiple roles at food companies and organizations supporting mission-driven food companies, including leading sustainability for the brands Annie's and Cascadian Farm, and serving as the director of operations at the Good Food Awards. Jane Kuhn had sustainability at Once Upon a Farm, the leading childhood nutrition brand. At O-Farm, her work is focused on sustainability strategy development. This includes key initiatives for environmental and social stewardship in the supply chain through strategic supplier relationships and ingredient selections, and continuous improvement within packaging. Prior to working in the CPG industry, Jane spent 10 seasons farming produce. She studied sociology and agroecology and has an MBA in sustainable solutions. Luke Peterson is a first-generation farmer of 1,200 acres in Lac Qui Parle, County, Minnesota, and is the Regenerative Organic Alliance flagship farm for the Midwest. USDA Organic Certified since 2015 and Regenerative Organic Certified, or ROC, since 2022. His mission is to grow food alongside of innovative consumer packaged good partners to grow both healthier food and a more resilient landscape through good farming and good business. Luke upholds the highest known standards for soil health, animal welfare, and farmer fairness. He believes that through direct trade partnerships and local food systems, we can create an abundant, diverse, and equitable economy of collaboration. He believes the more diverse an ecosystem is, the better chance it has to survive and thrive, and that drives his diverse crop rotation, cover crops, perennials, and the rotational grazing of a grass-fed beef herd. Luke lives on the farm with his wife, Allie, and his 3 children. So, I'm really excited for this conversation. Maybe, I think before we get any farther, it'd be really great to have some context setting. And perhaps, Christina and Jane, you could each share a little bit about your sourcing models. I'd be really curious to know in particular what the key drivers were that pushed your organizations towards adopting a new sourcing model. Was it a response to the climate crisis, farmer needs, business imperatives, or something else? And maybe Christina, if you wouldn't mind getting us started.
Yeah, sure. So our direct trade program with sunflower growers in the Midwest, like Luke, came out of a lot of different factors, a little bit of all of the above. But one of the ways I like to think about how we make decisions at Simple Mills is we look at this intersection of consumer insights and what we call farmer insights. And we look at that intersection because we want to make decisions that are considering the full context of the supply system. And with that, we spend a lot of time talking to farmers like Luke, and we've learned a ton in that process. So we've learned, for one, that most of the farmer partners we work with really don't need any convincing that things like soil health are important or ecosystem resilience is important. We share those values. But we do hear that farmers face some headwinds in implementing practices like cover cropping, extended diverse crop rotations, rotational grazing, partly because of how our food system is designed to disproportionately place risk on the farm level of the supply chain. So with that, we really see our role at Simple Mills as helping partner to remove barriers to implementing those practices, and also to co-invest in the upfront cost of those practices. So our direct trade program started in 2020. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary at Luke's farm back in August. We also work with a wonderful partner, John Strophus. I don't know if he's here today, but he is a farmer himself, and he helps us manage the contracts and parts of the supply chain. We've worked with, I think, 13 growers over 3 states in the Midwest, and about 3,000 acres to date. And the contracts in this program are designed really intentionally. So there are a few pieces to it. So one, we pay for the cost of planting seed, and that's to show our upfront commitment to the farmer to say, hey, we're in this with you. We pay a per acre reimbursement for the implementation of certain practices. So that could be like covering the cost of cover crop seed, or paying for fencing for rotational livestock grazing, or maybe it's paying for a roller crimper to terminate cover crop without using an herbicide. We really defer to the farmer to choose those practices and whatever equipment they want reimbursed, because they know the context of their farm systems a lot better than we do. We also structure the contracts to have an acreage offtake guarantee. So in other words, for the contracted acres, we will take everything that comes off of those fields, even if the yield is higher one year. So the farmer doesn't need to go looking for an alternate market, for example. And then lastly, just this last year, we were so excited to start our first multi-year contracts with 3 of the growers in the program. Luke is one of them. And that was after a lot of feedback and discussion and really understanding that that would be differential for growers. So we're doing that to really provide more certainty year over year so that the farmers can better plan out their rotations and have a little bit more stability. And the last thing I'll just say is that this program is really iterative. So we get a lot of very honest, very helpful feedback from the growers every year. And with that, we make little tweaks and we evolve the program. So I imagine it will look different again next year.
Awesome.
Just a little background, if you're not familiar with our products or brand, not unlike, so some background on our current sourcing model. We are a multi-ingredient brand. We source over 100 different ingredients. And not like many other multi-ingredient brands, our supply chain is incredibly complex. These 100+ ingredients come from domestic sources, but also global sources. We source a lot of produce, fruits and vegetables, and specifically organic fruits and vegetables. And so when we asked ourselves, what would it look like to do more, to go beyond organic? For us in our supply chain, given that organic produce is so labor intensive, farmer and farm worker well-being is the most material issue area for us to focus on. And as we have leaned into this focus area, one of the pillars through which we are taking action on this is through a strategic sourcing partnership with the Equitable Food Initiative, or EFI. And if you're not familiar, EFI is a nonprofit that is dedicated to transforming agriculture and improving the lives of farm workers. And they have myriad of initiatives through which they go about this mission, one of which is a rigorous third-party audited certification that was designed specifically for produce fields and pack houses. And in 2024, we last year became the first consumer goods brand to source and pay premiums on fruit from Equitable Food Initiative certified farms. We procured over 7 million pounds of certified fruit, which represents about 30% by volume of the ingredients in our core portfolio. So given how complex our supply chain is and how many ingredients we source, this is a first step that we're really proud of. I will also be the first to say that certifications are not perfect. Certifications aren't going to save the world on their own. However, something I admire most about EFI's certification is that it really implores culture change at the farm level. It implores continuous improvement, and it really implores worker voice to be central and informing the operations at the farm, which is a paramount shift from the status quo. So it's not a checkbox certification by any means. And a couple of the things that drove this shift, or kind of guiding our attention towards farmer and farm worker well-being. One, to our leadership team's credit, one of the first conversations I had with them when I joined the company a few years ago they said, hey, we're really proud of being organic, but what would it look like to do more? So I applaud their curiosity, and that question came out of their leadership leading a PBC, a public benefit corporation, and a B Corp. Also, when we start to get to know our supply chain and identify what are the vulnerabilities, how do we set ourselves up for long-term resiliency? This is an answer. I say that not as a destination, but a journey, to that question. And lastly, the business imperative is really baked in. We have seen that the quality of the fruit is better. When workers are well cared for, the quality of the fruit goes up, and that's something that we certainly care a lot about.
I love both of those approaches and appreciate you sharing a little bit of that context as we dive further in this conversation. Luke, you have a really unique story, and I would love it if you could just share a little bit about your farm and provide maybe a little bit of a firsthand perspective on how the sourcing model that Christina shared a little bit about has impacted your operations. And I'd also be curious in what ways that model aligns with or supports the goals you're working on your farm more broadly.
Yeah. So we started farming about 12 years ago, started conventionally. Prior to farming, I should add that my job was within the Department of Natural Resources with prairie restoration. So when I got involved with conventional agriculture, I quickly realized that it was hard. It was getting very difficult for me to ignore what I had learned at the Department of Natural Resources and how an ecosystem functioned. So that pushed me into organic agriculture. Once I got into organic agriculture, I quickly realized that organic is becoming industrialized, and that just moved me into regenerative agriculture. So we farmed 12 to 1,400 acres this year, certified ROC. We have a diverse crop rotation that lasts up to 12 to 15 years. We have integrated livestock onto the cropland as a fertility source. Every acre is cover cropped, and everything goes into the winter untilled and with crop residue on top. So we're managing a diverse system, and when I started farming, I knew that because of my geographical location and the competitiveness that there is in agriculture, I would need to make friends in the food industry. I would need to make friends with ingredient buyers. There isn't a market for these crops where I'm from. If you think about the United States or the world, we grow corn and soybeans in this part of the country. We grow wheat in this part of the country. We grow our fruits and vegetables in this part of the country. And it's all becoming so simplified for the sake of efficiency. And going against that efficient system is very difficult. So back to my comment about I needed to make friends. And one of my friends that I made was Christine was at Simple Mills. And it's a relationship business. It's an example of how important it is if you go down this path that you remain committed, because both sides are trying to do their best. And I think that it's important that we meet each other in the middle and just hear what each other has to say and try to pick a path forward. And we've been working together 5 years. I think it took 3 years before we had a multi-year contract, but that is the first multi-year contract that I have. And so to the middle part of your question, that multi-year contract is very important when you consider that I have a 12-year rotation. I'm not asking for a 12-year commitment, but to get a 2-year commitment is a big deal for me and my family. So we put the investment as a family to put these crops in the ground, to rent the soil, to buy the equipment, and to have that assurance when we go to bed at night that we're gonna push the envelope, do the next best thing, probably fail at it, but then knowing that we will have a market the following year is a very big deal, and is something that is not very common. So. And then another piece is We share in the risk factor for implementing one of the regenerative practices, which is cover crops. The per acre basis that we partner on. I take half the cost, Simple Mill takes half the cost, and then we can do the work such as cover cropping. And then also with the seed reimbursement. The nice thing about the seed reimbursement is that I can say, that was the seed that you gave me to plant. And that's also a really intricate thing when you're selling ingredients as a farmer, are the different varieties that are out there and how they work in CPG companies' products. So my point I'm trying to make is there's a ton of collaboration, a ton of communication, and yeah, it's been good.
I love that. The phrase that came to mind as you were sharing is like moving at the speed of trust. And I think that that's really, for you sharing that it took 3 years to get that multi-year contract. This piece around the relational aspect, I guess, is what I want to keep highlighting, is that this work, I think, especially those of us maybe working in the climate space, I think that feels really enlivening, is that the opportunity to not just be in a transactional arrangement with someone, but the opportunity to go deeper in relationship. And I think that also really brings more joy to the work. Kind of continuing on this thread, I know there's a lot of your peers, climate practitioners, sustainability folks, sourcing folks in the room today. And as I know many of us are aware, there's currently significant uncertainty in the food industry regarding the implications of the shifting agricultural landscape, tariffs, and workforce. And I'm curious, I imagine that these factors will likely impact how companies approach sourcing. And I'm curious if you think that your sourcing models might help reduce costs, or alternatively, what advice would you give your peers to help advocate for this model with their CFO, or help make that business case? And maybe Jane, we'll start with you.
Sure. When having this conversation, either internally with your team or externally in environments like this, I always think it's important to first differentiate between price and cost. Because usually when this conversation is being had, it's about price. And I interpret that as price is like, a line item on COGS. But the reality is there are often so many costs that are hidden in that price that are externalized, and someone is paying for them, if not now, in the future. And so when I think of the potential cost of a truckload of raw material that we have to turn away because it doesn't meet our quality standards, when I think of the potential cost of food safety risks, when I think of the potential cost of instability in labor availability to even pull the crops out of the field, then yes, absolutely. The program that we are building around farm worker well-being absolutely, is in service of preventing and minimizing those costs.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Christina, what about for you?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that when we buy sunflower seeds in this program, we understand that we're buying a lot more than sunflower seeds. We know that we're making a really important investment in families, in rural economies, in climate action, and really importantly for Simple Mills, we're making an investment in our own supply resilience. So certainly in times of geopolitical uncertainty, like the Ukraine crisis, in the face of tariffs, it's really handy to have deep, trusted sourcing partnerships that are domestic. So that's an element of risk buffering, right? We also have the ability to go visit these farms frequently, and we have direct line of sight to the quality of the ingredients and the people and places growing them. And then these multi-year contracts are beneficial for us too, right? Because we have a set price year over year, and we are weathering the volatility of markets together. So there's some stability in that for both parties. But I will say, I think making the case for programs like these requires more creative metrics of success than short-term margins. And I think it requires codifying those metrics. So for us at Simple Mills, we look at a few different things. We are tracking number of acres enrolled in programs like this, number of farmers, We're tracking number of employees that we're able to bring out to farm visits, and we're regularly reporting out on those things internally and externally. And I think that that helps build momentum and a lot of internal pride for the program, and accountability too. But I will say, I think there's like no real substitute for just spending time on a farm and seeing healthy soil and talking to a pioneering farmer. So if you can get your CFOs out to some farms and make your pitch there, I mean, I think that's the move.
I love that. I love both of those approaches. Luke, I'm curious, from your perspective as a farmer, what systemic changes do you think are necessary to support the broader adoption of multi-year contracts and direct sourcing? How can brands in this room and other supply chain partners play a more supportive role in making farmer-centric models viable? And how can brands support or incentivize farmers to shift away from carbon-intensive farming practices?
Yeah, I feel like there's a chicken or the egg there in that
Yeah.
question. How do you get farmers to move away from it? How do you get companies to support the opposite? There is no silver bullet that's going to change things. It's going to be 1 acre, it's going to be one ingredient, it's going to be one product, one consumer making the right choice at the right time. But I think there is a responsibility that the farmer has in giving transparency. And then if he's truly transparent in his practices and what he is doing, he's saying, he's doing what he's saying that he's doing. If the company can relay that to the consumer, maybe that will result in a purchase. I guess we're always trying to figure this out at scale, and that's just where I get lost, because I'm back on the farm and I look across the county. I drive to Minneapolis. I fly to California. It is conventional agriculture. I mean, we are trying to fit in, we're trying to fit into a model that we might not be able to fit into. We are going to have to create a completely new one. And I think that's exactly what we're doing, is we're starting small and taking small steps. One thing I could see companies taking is maybe putting more employees in this space. You have a small group of employees in the sustainability sector. And if you look at the challenges that we have ahead of us, you might need to put more people focusing on this so they're not overused and they have time to really understand what it is they're trying to accomplish.
I love that. That last piece too, we often talk about at the collaborative, the opportunity to really bring climate work alive throughout the organization. And I think, Christina, to your point, and I know, Jane, you've also shared this before in our briefing call, the opportunity to bring different folks from cross-departmentally. It also just, again, really brings this work alive within the organization. And I think you just naturally start to build more allies, which is really critical, especially in times when budgets can get constrained or restricted, to have those other champions that can really see the value and the opportunity of this work. And in our briefing call, we were talking about some opportunities that have emerged kind of beyond improving supply chain resilience. And I'd be curious to hear from you all on kind of some of those unexpected benefits that have emerged from shifting to this way of sourcing. And I'm curious if there's any lessons learned that surprised you. And maybe I'll start with you, Christina.
Sure. Oh gosh, there have been so many benefits in this program. I can't overstate the power, though, of the relationships that we've built. And I have to say, it's not just me and Luke. It's Luke is on texting basis with half of our team. So it's a lot of people who bring this program to life. But yeah, I imagine that a lot of us sustainability professionals are spending a ton of time with data and tracking impact and reporting impact, and that work is super important. But I think that this program has really helped us humanize our climate action work, and it's kind of regrounded us in the fact that we're doing all this work on behalf of real people and real communities, and because we care about public health too. I was remembering that I had the total privilege of seeing Gina McCarthy speak here at Climate Day. I think it was 2018.
Yeah.
And she said something that really stuck with me, and it was so funny. She said something like, I don't do birds or bunnies or polar bears. I'm a people person. And for me, it was this great reminder that we are doing this work because we care about human beings and we want our communities to have a habitable planet to live on. And we want farmers to keep growing food for us, please. So yeah, I think getting to know families like Luke's through this program have been just such a gift and a huge motivator for us. But there are other perks too, like there's a big innovation benefit for us. So every time we talk to Luke or other farmers in the program, we talk about sunflowers, yes, but we inevitably end up talking about the other things that Luke grows, and I can't keep track anymore of how many things you grow. But it gives us all these ideas for other things we should be experimenting with and ways that we should be finding delicious homes for these ingredients that farmers want to grow. So there's that source of innovation, inspiration. Our use of things like watermelon seed flour and buckwheat and red beans, butternut squash, all of those things that have become beloved to us really came out of conversations with these farmers in this program. And then the last thing I'll say, I could go on and on about unexpected perks, but internal learning is huge, right? So I think we've been able to bring 20 folks out to Luke's farm of our employees. And Luke has come to speak to our entire company before about all things soil health, biodiversity, agriculture in general. And that internal learning, that investment in employee learning and development is tremendously valuable too.
I love that. Jane, what about for you?
Yeah, well, to state the obvious, or the obvious realization for us is when workers are well cared for, that shows up in the quality and safety of the fruit and vegetables that we're buying. So that's as obvious as it is, but like a number one learning from this. Additionally, I've been pleasantly surprised by the potential upside for cross-functional interests as well. An example was last year when we sat down and approached, one of the suppliers we partner on through the, partner with through the EFI on, and we approached them, to just have a strategic conversation. Can we get creative with varieties or shipping mechanisms or contracts? And without missing a beat, their leadership said, yes, we want to work with you. One, because we believe in the brand, and two, because you're paying the premiums. And to me, that was just such a signal or a reminder that our investment in something like their EFI program was a signal to them that we were invested in them as a business and as a key strategic partner. And now we're at the table kind of in a renewed way, which hopefully is advantageous, to our procurement team and our ops team as well. And lastly, kind of similar to what Christina was speaking about, the employee engagement opportunities are really not to be overlooked. At least at OFarm, but I'm sure in so many other places, there's just such a deep yearning to feel connected to the people and plants behind the ingredients that go into our products. And most of us at OFarm are behind a laptop most of the day. And just shy of being able to take all 130 of us out to an orchard, which frankly wouldn't make for a very intimate experience anyway if we did that. We started hosting quarterly virtual Know Your Farmer events where we bring in farmers and farm workers, really trying to gear folks with different expertise, at the farm level, to share photos and videos and kind of walk the company through what the season looks like, what their role looks like, and to build a reciprocal relationship and kind of start to build relationships outside of the traditional sales procurement. And that kind of employee engagement, you can track it to culture and retention, of course, but it also, I think, really helps deepen and solidify mission and purpose, which is crucial, as people go off into their own cross-functional roles.
I love that. Luke, what about for you?
I hate this question because I always get emotional. But it's like the winter time and you get to focus on all the cool things you got to do all of last summer and the cool things you got to do next summer. But it's a sense of purpose. Anyway, I cannot describe to you the feeling that you get. God, I do this every time. It's ridiculous. Anyway, but it's I think like farmers, you're kind of alone a lot. So you get recognized and you get to talk to different people and you get to show them what you've done and why you've done it. And yeah, it's just having a sense of community, being around people that think the way you do. And it's like a whole lots of different things. Like I can be creative and I'm really busy, but I'm really busy doing things that make sense. You know, I'm not just a number and I'm just dumping my grain in a hole in town and it gets put on a train and I don't get to see it again. Like I grow food, I grow ingredients. And when I get to, you know, go pick a box of Simple Mills crackers off the shelf or something, I can like throw it at my boy, you know, I feel like, hey, like we did that, you know, like we're involved with that, and that's really cool, so.
I love that. I think we're getting close to, we've got about 12 minutes left before Q&A. So maybe for this next question, we could be a little, maybe give shorter responses, but, you know, I'm really curious to lean a little bit more into how can companies strategically invest in farmers to ensure long-term economic and climate resilience? And I know we've talked a little bit about this, but perhaps to lean in a little bit more, what types of investments are most impactful in enabling farmers to transition away from carbon-intensive practices? And Jane, can we start with you?
Sure, yeah. I'm so glad that you're asking this question. It's an important one. And it also makes me really appreciative that you're joining us, Luke, and to Simple Mills for, you know, inviting your partner, Luke, here, because your perspective is really important. And I think to answer this question, we really have to have our ear to the ground and be listening to what farmers and farm workers are telling us they need. That lived experience should really drive this work. And representation at the metaphorical table around strategic planning and decision making is imperative. It's no secret that often in CPG spaces that representation is lacking. And I thought, you know, in effort to, since I am not a farm worker myself, in effort to bring some of those experiences that I am learning about to you, I wanted to just share very quickly about a survey that a nonprofit we partner with, Semillero de Ideas, conducted last year. They surveyed 211 farm workers in Washington state about how climate change is impacting them. To our knowledge, this is the only survey of its kind, actually interviewing farm workers about climate change impacts, so hoping to build on this a lot in the coming years. Of those surveyed, 211 folks, 70% said that they are making adaptations in their day-to-day life on the job, 70%. And of those, the number one response, 58%, the adaptation was clothing adaptations in, you know, day-to-day job. In the response to often it was heat, drought, smoke were the top three. And I share this as a reminder that yes, we need large-scale big investments in systems change. And also let us not forget that there are real imminent needs right now that are often pretty low tech that shouldn't be overlooked. And when I think about clothing, you know, it kind of goes back to like when workers are working out for the quality of the fruit goes up. And I think of all the investment in sportswear, you know, to help you go faster or not injure yourself. And similarly, like harvest can be more efficient if, you know, folks have the type of apparel that they need. So I just offer that very small, very specific example as a reminder of who we should be listening to, who should be at the table, and not to overlook the immediate needs in climate adaptation.
I love that. Thank you for highlighting that. What about for you, Luke?
Got lost in thought there for a second.
What types of investments are most impactful, do you think, from a farmer's perspective, to help enable farmers to transition away from carbon-intensive practices?
I think it's just the main one for me would be that we have to look beyond our generation. We have to look forward to our kids or even their kids as kids. But I think that well, let's see. If you look at the farm as an investment versus just a way to extract from, it makes it a lot easier to do practices that are going to take care of it. So.
Yeah, I think there's so many important investments that we could all be making, but I think foundationally, our time is a really important investment. So just the time that we're taking to really understand the specific needs and goals of a given farmer network. So I imagine that all the companies that are represented here today have unique core competencies that could probably help advance the farmers' goals. For us at Simple Mills, that looks like, a big part of our mission and our innovation strategy is seeking out underrepresented ingredients in agriculture that are really nutrient dense and finding homes for them. So, when we talk to farmers and we ask them, what do you want to grow? What would really, round out your rotation? That's where we can kind of meet in the middle, and we're, creating these hopefully delicious products with really interesting ingredients and helping kind of round out a crop rotation. But yeah, I think generally it's good practice to spend time understanding your unique grower network and their context, and then matching that up with a company's core capabilities and finding the places where those two things overlap.
Yeah.
I'd like to add too that from a farmer's perspective, no market, no mission. So if there's no market for us, then we just can't participate. So I think that's really important too. So if we can build these markets and let farmers have access to them, that's kind of where it starts.
Yeah, and perhaps to build off of that, and would love to start with you, Luke, what advice would you give companies in the audience, especially those that may feel they lack the scale to establish direct sourcing relationships? What alternative approaches might they be able to take to help advance regen ag and support farmers in a meaningful way?
Yeah, well, I've worked with all different sizes of companies, from small mills and bakeries to small CPG companies, all the way up to like Simple Mills and Patagonia and things like that. But at a small scale, you may have the time or to go visit farms and start educating yourself that way. But I think just don't get lost in it and just go do the next best thing.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Christina?
For advice?
For companies that might think, really for any size companies, around the opportunity to establish direct sourcing relationships.
Yeah, I think I'd say don't underestimate the power of sending a signal. I know for most of us, we aren't able to totally upend a supply chain overnight. But if you start asking your suppliers questions about the growing conditions in your supply chain, or you start asking for better visibility to growers or the ability to develop relationships with those growers, I think that sends a really important message that we expect to have that traceability and transparency, and we want to build those connections to the people and places growing our ingredients.
I love that. It's kind of like, we talk about signaling a lot too. If no one asks, then it's kind of like, well, then no one cares. So at a minimum, asking the questions. Yeah, if you are with a brand or company and you feel like scale is not on your side to be influential, I think this is where, I got two not very exciting answers, but one, this is where I think certifications can play a really helpful role. Or our least worst tool available to us, and I can use organic as one example, or regenerative organic as a certification example, and ask yourself, are any of the ingredients that we're sourcing certified organic? If they are we celebrating that? If they're not, could some of them be? Because we know that organic practices prevent toxic and persistent pesticides from entering our soil and waterways and build soil health. And knowing that there is a marketplace built around organic that brands of any size can access. And that sends a market signal too. And second, to your point, Christina, I think just continuing to learn more about your supply chain. It's not the sexy work, but it's really laying a strong foundation building relationships, in addition to the traditional sales and procurement relationships. I think of it as like peeling back layers, and the opportunities will present themselves.
I love that. Reciprocal relationships, communication, transparency. I love the themes that are coming up so far. I think we are ready to turn to audience Q&A. And there should be some folks, I think, that will be running around with mics. I see that they're getting their mics right now. So if you just want to raise your hand, then we can have someone walk around and find you to ask your question. Perfect. We've got some folks in the middle right here.
Hi, I just want to say that this was an amazing panel and just my first one, and I'm just really, really excited to be here. My question, I think, is mainly for Luke and Christina, but how did you decide which practice to start with? Like, you talked about cover cropping, and how did you come to that as a start?
Well, so cover cropping is one of many. When I went from conventional to organic to regenerative, and maybe it was before our relationship that I was doing these things, but I was doing them on my own, and that wasn't a long-term strategy for success. So thank God I've built relationships along the way. And but for me personally on the farm, it started with soil health equals human health. That was my ultimate goal. And I think we started with diverse crop rotation first. Next we went to cover crop. Next we went to no-fall tillage. Next we went to integrating livestock. And before all of that, we eliminated synthetic fertilizers and chemical. It was a very long, well, not long, but I mean, it's a road that started a long time ago that we're gradually just building on. So, and if you think about in terms of farming, right? Like, we're going to eliminate tillage. Well, that's farming. We're going to eliminate chemical. Well, that's farming. We're going to eliminate synthetic fertilizer. Well, that's farming. We're going to get rid of the fancy GMO seeds. Well, that's farming. We're going to, build our diversity. Well, now we're getting out of being efficient. And we're not doing any of the things that I grew up seeing as farming. So I don't even know what you call what we're doing now, but we're just going to keep going.
Thank you.
Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Also a question for Farmer Luke. From one farmer to another, I can imagine that going from conventional to organic to regenerative to now what you do, which is magic, is a daunting task. What piece of it, like simple, if you will, knowing that it's not always easy advice, would you give to another farmer?
You have to have that purpose piece. If you don't have that, forget it, because you're not going to be sleeping on your tractor floor. You're not going to have failures year after year, and just want to keep doing it. Eventually you will get tired of it. But have a purpose, understand why you're doing it, and then get a community of people around you to support you.
Okay, question for Christina. So you mentioned that your system has a really heavy emphasis on continuous improvement and feedback and so forth. I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the changes you've had to make and some of the improvements based on that feedback in your system that have come about.
Yeah, great question. One small one I'll mention is that we used to call that per acre reimbursement an incentive, and we're trying to stop using that word because of what I mentioned earlier, that these farmers need no incentive. They already really want to use these practices, so it's really about partnering to make that more attainable. But the multi-year contract element that we just started this last year, that really came out of those conversations, and our team that runs this program asks for survey feedback every year. We were hearing from multiple farmers over and over again, like multi-year contract is the thing that would make this differential. even more than we were hearing about a higher price. So that stability year over year seemed like it was a no-brainer for both parties, honestly.
Hello, Andrew Lauturngel. Luke, you said no market, no mission. And then Christina, you talked about a sunflower partnership and talked about this crop rotation. I've been trying to build this at my company, but the issue is we're only buying a single crop, and so that crop's part of our rotation. So the practices are plot and farm based, but I'm only buying, one of three crops that are in that rotation, and then next year that crop's going to be in another plot, and the next year on another plot. So effectively, I'm trying to incentivize a change in practices that's got to go on multiple plots and multiple crops, but I'm only buying a small share of the total. So, Luke, how have you dealt with that, especially with your market question, market comment? And I'm thinking back to when you first started. And then Christina, how'd you deal with this in sunflower? I'm not sure if you're buying the other parts of the rotation. And Jane, I'd ask you a question, but I'm not sure exactly a practical example, so I don't have a question for you.
So I started without having a clear path on where I was heading. I threw my third crop into the rotation, which was wheat. That year, we got involved with a lot of stuff. We met a group of people that led me to a market that needed wheat. The next year I just seen, well, what's the next best thing that I could plant in my rotation? And it just kept building that way, just organically. Where I'm at now is I try to don't get hung up on the idea that you have to grow the rotation. That's not your job. Your job is to have a relationship with farmers. You're not the only ingredient buyer out there. There's other there's other buyers the farmers can go to build that system that works for them. It's hard enough with our geographical location on the farm to figure out what I should grow, when I should grow it, and how long it should be in the rotation, and which farm it should be on, and those things. It's just not a space that I don't think buyers need to be in. They need to just be conscious about what ingredients work well for them, and then whether or not they have a direct consumer or a direct partnership with the farm that is growing it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I would just say, of course, not all companies are going to be able to create a market for all of the ingredients in a rotation as large as someone like Luke's. However, to Luke's point, there are probably other brands that buy the other crops in the rotation. And for us at Simple Mills, it's been really fun to get to know the other brands who partner with Luke. So we've made friends with Love Lil Bucks and Patagonia Provisions. We only are buying sunflower from Luke, but we know that we're part of an ecosystem of brands that are buying other things. So we all play a different role in that system. And I think that's probably true of some of the fields where you're pulling sunflower from.
Hello, my name is Shauna. I'm with CCOF. My question's for you, Jane. You mentioned the Know Your Farmer events because you can't fly 130 people out to the farm. Are those virtual events that you're hosting just for staff, or is that something that you open out to the consumer and make it a more public opportunity to engage your audience with the farmers that are growing your food?
Thank you, Shauna. That's a great question. So far, last year, it's just been for internal OFarm, but I love the idea of being able to extend that bridge of connection even more broadly. So thank you for the suggestion. Love it.
Hi, I'm Justine. I'm representing a purpose-driven retailer, and I'm here at the show. And I think your comment about ecosystems sparked my question. How do you grow this ecosystem that you're creating here and perpetuate it? Thinking about Luke, the way you described, you know, your small little space in a sea of conventional growers across the country, and trying to work outside of that system and how inefficient it is. But it seems like you all are all creating something that's really a solution for that. And so how do you grow that ecosystem, and how can retailers support that?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, to be very honest, this program is deep and narrow for us at Simple Mills. It's not the biggest like acreage impact or number of farmers enrolled compared to some of our other programs. But what we always say is that we hope we're helping create a blueprint for something that others could learn from, both the successes and the foibles. So yeah, I think just starting even on like a pilot scale to show a model and have others learn from that is a starting point. But I think it comes back to this foundational idea of just having conversations throughout the supply chain. So certainly at Simple Mills, we're very excited to have our retailers come out to farms like Luke's. We're actually doing that later this year. So if you're a retailer and you have brands that are focused on this work, it might be worth asking if you could go out to one of the farms that they're working with.
And when I'm just picturing my product move throughout the supply chain and then it gets on the shelf or not, I just think the retailers are really hold the key to success here, because they can strategically put things in certain places that have a better chance of selling, or just having advertisements in the store maybe, where that'd be another place to showcase companies that are working towards similar goals that you are.
Jane, is there anything that you want to touch on related to this question?
Yeah, I would love to. It's a great question. Thank you, and I appreciate those insights. I have my curiosity is around produce specifically, but I'd be super curious if you all experience something similar in a different category. It's been really interesting to learn that in the fresh produce set, there's a high level of fluency, I think, around social and environmental, considerations and benchmarks and what's out there and prioritizing. But then the second that produce gets, pureed or powdered or put into a pouch or a bar, it's almost like an entirely different world. And then there we talk about packaging, which is appropriate and makes sense. But it's almost totally forgotten. And when we are selling into we sell into different sets, in the retailers. But so we're often not working with the fresh produce buyer. We're working either with like the baby buyer or in the dairy set or what have you. And I'm just noticing there's just seems to be like a huge disconnect. And so when I want to speak about the work we're doing in the fields and orchards, I know it would land really well with fresh produce, but it doesn't always land in the other categories. And so I think just continuing to build fluency across the categories, I just think there's so much possibility with that.
I love that. I think we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Becky Spradley. I run the Sustainable Agriculture Program at Amway. And my question is for Jane or maybe Christina. Would you mind sharing, and I really appreciate your transparency so far, how large your team is to be doing this work with your partner growers? And then when you do have a lot of ingredients, like you mentioned, Jane, how do you prioritize which growers you visit in person yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Just for a little more, I think I mentioned earlier, but Once Upon a Farm is a team. We're roughly 130, give or take, total. Our sustainability function is me, and I have a full-time colleague, and we have a couple interns. But we are, and it sounds cliche to say, a very cross-functional team. And we've worked really hard to really position ourselves as a resource to other functions of the business. So we work very closely with procurement and ops and marketing and quality. So I share that as we are a small team, which is no surprise, but we are very closely connected with other departments. And in terms of how we prioritize who we're going to visit, really apply a lens of materiality. So certainly those from whom we are buying significant volumes from, absolutely. Those who are prospective, where we are seeking to build supplier relationships, absolutely, even before we've maybe even purchased the first, item, first crop. And of course, in materiality, I would say like anything high risk too, is how I sort of address that prioritization.
I'll just add that very similar on the kind of team structure front. So we have 3 full-time people on our sustainability and mission team, but like Jane's team, we're working really closely with the procurement team, and they actually lead our direct trade program, and we're supporting them on that. So they are our heroes of making this program work and figuring out the supply chain. So yeah, it's absolutely cross-functional. And in terms of visiting farms, I would say sometimes we don't always have the ability to perfectly decide which farms we want to go to. It depends on who we have relationships with. So certainly in a program like this where we have strong personal relationships, we are keen to get out to every one of those farms. But in full transparency, it can be a little bit harder with some of our other crops where the supply chains aren't quite as traceable and transparent.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we have any more time for Q&A, but there's obviously a lot of appetite and interest in what you all have been sharing in this topic more broadly, so really appreciate, before I officially close it out though, maybe in 30 seconds, if you could all just share one key action or mindset shift you hope companies take away from this conversation, and maybe we'll just start with you, Jane, and go down the row.
Sure. Yeah, I hope we take away not to forget the human and relational component of climate action work. I fundamentally believe that the climate crisis is the result of extractive relationships. Extractive relationships to natural resources like water and soil, but also extractive relationships with people. And I just really believe if we cannot right those relationships, then we cannot drive the meaningful systems change that is required of us.
I would just leave you with small steps, just one small step at a time.
Love that. I agree with both of those. So incrementalism is a big one. We talk about at Simple Mills. But I would also just say, to echo Jane, like really find ways to humanize your work on climate. I think it makes it way more fun and way more motivating, and it will probably bring new insights to your business.
I love it. Well, please give me a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you so much to Jane, Luke, and Christina for sharing your insights with our community this morning. We're going to take a quick 15-minute break, but we'll start back up in this room at 12:15 for leveraging and building Scope 3 value chain partnerships with Oatly, UNFI, and Supplier Locked. In Grand Ballroom E, we're featuring a session on emerging opportunities in food waste featuring Refed, Carry, and Sodexo. So we'll see you back up in here or over there at 10:15. Thanks.